Thank you so much, everyone. Welcome to this session on multi-stakeholder engagement. I guess that is the way that most of the times we call it. We're going to give it a bit of a more fancy name to the session today: architecting cooperation in complex systems. Okay, sounds fancy, right? And I'm going to explain you why is it that we're going to look at it this way. Now, as an introduction, and as we are waiting for a couple of minutes for people to gather, I just want to thank you again. I see many returning names and locations on the chat, which is fantastic. I also want to share that as an additional way to to facilitate connection, hopefully to the course. We're also live streaming on LinkedIn, I believe so, which is a great opportunity also to reach out to many other people. So if this is your first time, welcome to this course on reclaiming development. It has been a few sessions as of now. And as many of your fellow participants can tell you, right, like this course has been built around the idea and the moment of the urgency of reflecting about the future of the international development space. I don't have to tell you about the different challenges that international development is going through, especially during the last year, but also like how this is also the reflection of many of the challenges that the space has had over the years. If you have been with us, you know that we have been trying to build this class from the concept and the idea of how the definition of development goals is extremely important because that defines your ambition, your focus, and the tools over time. And what we have seen is that part of that legacy of development, how that has been connected over time with geopolitics, with colonialism, but also with this idea that the solution to development problems is fundamentally mechanistic. That there is a series of mechanisms that will take you from the problem to the solution directly. That there are issues of determinism in the way that we approach development, very much reflecting the origins of this in Cartesian and Newtonian science. In the same way that there has been in science an evolution over time in the way that we think, that we approach things, supported by the scientific method, by experimentation. We need to rethink and reclaim development in a way that is much more open, participatory, inclusive, in a way that allows for different perspectives to come in, and also in the end to have better and more comprehensive goals and tools towards what we are pursuing together. Also, if the problems in development are complex, then you require, as we're going to see, cooperation. And in order for cooperation to happen, you need to understand the different individuals involved in the development space, in a particular development problem. You need to understand what is their behavior, their motivation. How is it that we need to go beyond the rational actor framework? And we look at that in the last class, in the previous class. Now we're going to go a bit deeper and try to understand that behavior of individuals depending on where is it that we're located. What is the hat that we wear, if you want? Is it the same if you work in private sector, in a bureaucracy, or as part of civil society? So the readings that were assigned and proposed to you for this session try to go precisely about that nuance. The challenges of actually understanding the behavior of different actors depending on their role in a particular environment, in a particular context. So we're going to move ahead and talk about this. But first, we need to talk about your words. So I have been reviewing the feedback that you have been providing. As you know, what we do is like every week we propose you three questions, that three prompts, and we give you two options to answer them. You can do it through a Miro board, or you can do it through a survey, a jot form that we send you a link for. And we're very thankful for the contributions that you have made so far. This is going to be extremely useful. This course is just an excuse. In the end, it's supposed to be a mechanism for contribution to solutions to concrete challenges. This is a space where if you choose to do it, right, you can bring a particular problem and look at it through the different lenses of the tools that we're going to be exploring during these sessions. So hopefully you will find it very useful. But here's the thing. If we go to the first board where we actually ask you about we ask you about what is it that you think that needs to change in international development, where we ask you about what are the kind of things that you will do if you have the power and resources to just implement a particular important idea in international development. And we ask you about some initiatives that inspire you and that you find that they are trying to do things different. So if I start looking at your answers, right, we can see this very clear positioning, right? Like this clarity in terms of like the moral, the ethos of what we're trying to do as a space. Fantastic. We see system level critiques. This was very common across the board for many of you. We have the epistemics of justice framing present. You have an orientation to avoid or be anti-hierarchies. Very common in the answers. And definitely a clear desire that we focus on long term, right? In things that may take long, but that are going to be long processes toward change, but that are important. All this is fantastic, is very good. But we're going to challenge you here, all right? So not surprisingly, right? Like we are all in the end working in this because we are a bit or a lot idealistic, right? And we want to make things happen and we want change to happen. But here's the thing. Your vision may actually lack those harsh realities of political resistance. So what about the issue of power, right? Are we aware of who is in the game that may actually prevent the results of a very well-intended policy or intervention to actually happen? Not because they are evil necessarily, right? But because they have a different perspective on the problem and the priorities. It could also very well be because of self-interest. This understanding of who loses from your reform is extremely important here, and who has the power actually to veto it, to stop it. But then what is next is, especially if you are trying to build alliances or trying to make to happen, it is important that we have a conversation about how progressively we can articulate political support, even at the local level, and understand that this is not going to work if the risk is concentrated in only a few people. We're going to be talking about this in a moment. Okay, so you may be demanding transformation, right? Like your morals are clear, the structural clarity of what we need to aim for, right? But how do we identify and how do we tackle entrenched power? That is going to be one of the key things that we're going to look, and we're going to propose to you a few tools that can help you. Some of these may be tools that you are already familiar with, okay? And then needs be even something that you have already applied in your work. Fantastic. If that is the case, I want you actually to mention that in the chat box because we need you. We need you to share with others how this has worked for you in practical terms. This is not about the tools. right? The tools the tools are worthy if they are helpful. If they are not helpful for a particular problem, then we need probably different tools. That's part of the point. So do not fixate or try to obsess about these are the tools to get things right. The key thing is in the way that we find to apply them, right, to a concrete problem and find them or not useful, depending on the context of what we're trying to do. Okay, with this initial provocation, I wanted to just quickly acknowledge the presence of many of you over here. And I'm very thankful, for example, for seeing Anurada back, Victor Bor, thank you for connecting also on LinkedIn, Victor. I'm very thankful that you guys are over here. We're going to be actually mentioning by name some people that have contributed during the last couple of weeks. So if you are not present, hopefully you are watching the video or following the stream, and then you will have a chance of seeing also your name there. Hopefully you can have a reaction. If you are not present, please send us an email, especially if I have misinterpreted the way that you look at the program. Okay. Before moving ahead, I wanted to quickly introduce Leah List. Leah, thank you for joining us today. Leah is going to be helping us facilitate the chat box and basically any kind of exercise that we end up doing during this session. Leah, would you like to introduce yourself and say hi to the group?
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Very excited to be here and to hear what you all come up with. I will have the links ready for you all. And as Mario mentioned, we'll be monitoring the chat box, which related to that, Mario, we do have a question. If you have a few moments
Please.
to answer it, and I will interrupt you periodically throughout.
That's great. Fantastic. And by the way, if you can already drop, if maybe you have already done it, I'm sorry, the Miro board and the password, so people can actually interact with the board already throughout the class, that will be helpful. And this is especially if either you had not had the chance to complete the exercise, either the first board on the future of development or the second one specifically on stakeholders. Please go ahead, try to add information. Or if you have already done it and you want to add to it, maybe you didn't finish, feel free during the class to do it. It's easier to do it here live, and you can even ask us questions. Sometimes because of work and everything, we cannot do it during the week. Leah, you said that there is a question. Is it possible to give way to the person who asked? Maybe we can interact that way.
It was asked anonymously.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Um, Tell me, what is the
What
question?
what is the responsibility of the civic society in modern wars, and what can they do to reduce or avert conflicts?
Well, that's a very easy question. Thank you. Um, I guess that, and this is why actually I recommended that reading in particular by Mansouri and Rao, The War on Localizing Development, which was written under the working title, Does Participation Work? Which at the time was very provocative. So a bit of a story there. I actually worked with Ghazala Mansouri for some time at the World Bank. I met Biju Rao. I guess that he just left the bank, the World Bank. Um, they are fantastic, amazing researchers, and they truly provoke the field when they release this. So I want you to imagine this, right? Like you have two very well reputed, recognized, brilliant economists at the research center or the research department or the World Bank building a very comprehensive argument about how a lot of participatory development programs are not working. And they actually offer a framework for this. And on the other hand, you have, which explains the moment at which this happened, right? Like the highest level of investment in participatory development programs at the bank and throughout many donors at the time. These are the years where the discussion about social accountability, for example, was very powerful, based on a framework that was also became very popular through one of these World Development Reports that the World Bank has every year in 2004 or 2006, right? Particularly focused on service delivery. And throughout the years, what follows after many years was a series of investments, right, on participatory development, very much focused on engagement with civil society. And then you have somebody that is telling you, all this money that you are investing, there are tons of issues here because we're basically just offering, I'm simplifying the argument, we're just offering spaces for participation, but we are not really looking at the quality of that participation and who is participating ultimately. So, to the core of your question, yes, there is a responsibility of civil society, but I ask you there, who is this civil society? This big concept of basically organized citizens, right? Like became very popular, especially since Habermas, right? Like who is the one that wrote a lot about this. So civil society is supposed to occupy a particular space, right? Like to be precisely that, right? Like that civic space for discussion, for bringing perspective, for correcting, identifying challenges and all. But then what Ghazala and BU argue, right, like is that the same way that we identify and we know that there are out there market failures, when the market fail to actually assign prices properly, basically, um, the same way that governments that are supposed to complement or um, generate or fill the spaces that markets are not going to fill, okay, are not actually doing that necessarily for different issues, coordination and so on. Then there is this other group, this other collective where we have put a lot of hope, right, called civil society. But if we do not acknowledge the challenges that civil society have also in terms of like power, in terms of what's the word that we used last week that we introduced? Um, the Oh my God, it's escaping me right now. Um, what is it, right? Like, how is it that some members within the civil society actually have more voice, more weight than others? Is it because power relationships that like people are organized in such a way that only the leaders speak out or are the ones that represent the views and other views or other perspectives are silenced or silence themselves? Okay. Is it about the potential or the possibility of corruption also within civil society? Or is simply that also within civil society you have different interests? And we mentioned this as an example in the past. The idea that in the same territory you may have NGO that is very much focused in supporting efforts for environmental protection, and you may have a different NGO that is very much focused in job creation. And at some point, right, those interests are going to clash. So the question is back to you, right? Like, what is part of that responsibility? Do we just focus in preserving that discussion in such a way that we only defend what our NGO, what my hat is saying that I should be defending because in the end I believe in it? Or can I and should I extend my hand and do everything I can to work with the other NGO that actually has an interest on or a priority that is different than mine? I'm not giving you the answer. This is a question that we have to deal with because when problems are complex, right, as we have discussed in class one, then you are going to need some level of cooperation. You cannot do things alone. Or you cannot do things alone when you join forces only with the people that think exactly like you. I guess that is actually more precise in that sense. So I know that I haven't necessarily answered your question, but of course, there is responsibility first, right? And then what comes is the sense of accountability, right? Like given the problem. But it also has to do that with understanding what are these different incentives and hats that different members of civil society wear at different times. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But let me just pose you something for later. Maybe a question for anybody of you, if you would like to answer or put on the chat. All right. Who is the civil society? Can members of government, a public official, be part of civil society? Can the owner or a board member or an employee of a private company, is that person a member of civil society? So we're going to look a bit more about this. Please feel free to put on the chat some comments, questions, challenges to what I'm doing. I'm not looking directly at the chat right now, but Leah is going to be looking at this and she will bring some of these comments. And if you want to intervene and say something or share an experience, please, that's the whole class about. It cannot be just me talking. Go ahead, and if you want to share an experience or a comment on this, you are more than welcome. In the meantime, I'm going to continue. Okay? All right. So one thing that I saw concretely from your boards, especially here moving from the first board on development in general to the second board, where you identify a challenge that you are passionate about, and then what you did is you try to identify who are our main goal in terms of stakeholder, right? Like who is it that we're trying to help, to support, to benefit? Who will benefit from that particular intervention that you are passionate about? And then who are the people that we have to keep in mind to make it happen, either because they can support the effort or because they can block it, okay? So those are the questions that we posed to you last week for this week. Now, when you started to do this mapping of actors, right, this was very good and very comprehensive, okay? So there's a typo there, right, like in the slide. Like in that social environment, right, you have different kind of factors that have different relationships among themselves. Like you mentioned academic partners, funding bodies, local government, community groups, that was very common, etc. This is great. Okay. You raise the issue of exclusion versus representation. Okay. Who is left out? Who is supposedly being represented? And is that representation actually working? You also raise a very concrete issue. The connection can traffic contacting customer. Okay, perfect. There have been an issue with live stream. If you are seeing this recording later, I mean, like we're trying to bring the live stream back right away. You brought the issue of structural reform against programmatic interventions. Okay, this idea that in the end, even if you didn't say the word system, what you are aiming at is, or looking at, is at wanting different systems, not better projects. And we'll go over this next week when we talk specifically about systems. And then you raise the issue of ecosystem awareness against power blindness. And here is the thing, here is the gap, right? That is very important if you want things to happen. You map the actors, and your map may be actually very comprehensive, but you ignore the vetoes. And this is not that you are alone on this. This is actually very common. Look at most of the theories of change that you may have interacted in your life. Even when you look at the assumptions are typically brought like an extra thought, when that was not the original intention of theories of change and the assumptions behind theories of change. You're supposed to have a plan to respond to that. When you typically apply to a grant from a donor, right? Like they're gonna include typically a section that is called risk assessment. And you're supposed to actually have a plan about how are you going to deal with each one of the risks that are out there. I guess it's safe to say, right, that most of the times, like the way that we approach the answer to that section, right, is not that comprehensive. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe you have been very thoughtful in the way that you have been looking at each one of those risks, right? But I challenge you to think about how you have in your work, right, dealt with the discussion and the challenge of people that can actually block your reform. And what are you going to do about it? Okay, but that is an important question because that is going to define how you approach the idea of coalitions that we're going to explore today. Okay, anybody, any reaction really quick, Leah, from the chat so far? Please, anybody that would like to bring an experience, right, or something that happened to you in the past, or something that you learned maybe in another class that could be helpful or even contradict what I'm saying, please, always welcome.
Nothing so far, but agreed. I would really love it if anyone has any thoughts, please feel free to use the chat, or if you'd like to speak, let me know, and we can enable that.
Fantastic. So I'll just keep going, but please interrupt at any time. Leah can enable the microphone so you can actually ask the question directly to me, or you can add the question to the chat. Please go ahead. So I'm going to base this part on comments that were provided by two people, okay? I want just to simplify here things. One is Matilda Munjoroku in Kenya. Matilda, I hope that I pronounce your name correctly. And the other one is Evelyn Espinosa in Ecuador. Okay. She, for example, Matilda went directly to the issue of systems and participatory systems, right? And how most governance architecture is in nature non-participatory, right? What she in the end is raising is the need for institutional redesign and the idea of adaptive tools. And hopefully she's going to find, hopefully Matilda, you find that this class is helpful in terms of like recognizing and having those kind of discussions. She focuses very much in terms of like what to do about it in the concept of civic education, right? That currently is insufficient. The other point is that typically the civic education that we know, right, most of curriculums, as important as it is, we need to also think if it is responsive to the problems that we have and the type of problems that we have. Is it, if you are asking through civic education for commitment, engagement, responsibility in the end, right? Like, there needs to be a clear understanding of the shared responsibility. Because part of the problem is that many times when we emphasize these divisions between sectors or between types of stakeholders, government, civil society, or private sector, the only thing that we're doing is just to try to pass the responsibility to a different segment of society. Think about it, right? Like, because each one of these groups moves around a different optic, a different set of priorities, as you have seen during the readings, what we may assume is that that role of being the social glue, of keeping the issue of representation out there, the group that needs to be responsible for inclusion is civil society, when at the same time, on average, is that segment of society that holds the least power. I'm going to let that percolate for a moment. And again, if you have strong reactions, you disagree or agree, please feel free to intervene. Okay? So let's think about what Matilda and Evelyn have been sharing with us in terms of different stakeholders, right? The analysis that they did, especially on those that have been excluded in a particular problem. right? And I didn't mention, by the way, the discussion of Evelyn, right? And how she's focusing particularly in behavior, okay, communication. So this is going to be, I guess, obvious when I talk a little bit more about the actors, right? So each one of them, for example, try to map or at least provide some thoughts about who are the excluded and why, and then who do we need on board to change things. And I'm going to focus on this second part right now. Remember, everything that you produce and that you are bringing to the board is being synthesized over time because we want to understand what is the emerging narrative that comes out not from my slides, right, but from your feedback. And when we actually publish this, whoever contributes, right, to this and continues on the board is going to be included and invited to be a co-author of this because we want this to be the voice of the course. And then it's going to be complemented with some co-creation workshops in a few countries. Okay? I'm just repeating that in case it's the first time that you're joining us. So in terms of like who do we need on board, look at the diversity of factors that we have here. Matilda, right, like where she has been focusing more on institutions, like the way that she has been thinking at this, who do we need on board, right? Like includes more like, well, the chamas, merry-go-rounds, stable banking groups, fintech, men as norm allies, for example, right? Like, well, that is a specific actor. But if you move, for example, to the way that Evelyn looks at the issue, it's more focusing specific types of actors, right? Individuals, the educators, the media, the lawmakers, etc. Now, notice this because both are very much correct. Now, you may argue, right, that maybe just stating all the different types of actors, right, like it may be too broad, and then you need specific institutions that you need to deal with. But the point is that many times those key players, including influencers, right, and many others, are not necessarily organized in formal institutions. And at the same time, when you take an institutional approach to stakeholder mapping, you may be forgetting many people that are not necessarily organized under institutions. So just calling your attention in terms of like this tension and the different ways that two people may approach a problem. You may also argue that depending on the problem, it may make more sense to list more institutional actors than individual actors or vice versa. Okay? So right now, I'm just trying to call attention on that. Okay. Now, if we think here about what is very much present and what not so much, okay? So in the comments, when you develop your idea in the posits, we're looking very much this idea about normative clarity, structural critique that we already talked about, right? But then there is a leap. There is clearly an awareness, right, on the issues of power, right, and the importance or the potential of coalitions, but it's still out there, right? Like what is still lacking, and it's lacking in your comments. You actually, Evelyn, Matilda, you probably have this very clear in your heads, right? Like, but in your comments, right? Like what is still missing is that particular connection, right? Of like, how is it that these coalitions manifest, or how to make them manifest, right? And use it in defense of a particular type of intervention or policy that you may be supporting. Okay? And what is definitely missing still is that political sequencing, right, that we're going to try to identify today. So they are very much aware of the problem. They probably work in this particular problem. I guess that we don't have neither Emily or Matilda connected, but if you do, please let us know. So now what we're going to try to look is about issues of veto and the potential for vetoing what you are trying to do, risk absorption, and strategic timeline planning. Okay? When we send you the slides, look at this and consider it your cheat sheet. All right? We're trying to shift the mindset here from the idea of an economy, and we're going to talk in terms of economy, and I'll explain why in a moment, right? As a machine to an economy as an ecosystem. And then try to understand what may be barriers to effective coordination that we need to keep in mind when we build a strategy that has a chance. All right. So anybody, I want to ask you, have you heard of Jedi? Anybody's familiar with Jedi or with Jedi? Maybe that's how they refer to. Yeah, it's not this, but it's this, the global ecosystem dynamics. Now, the global ecosystem dynamics is a project that started in 2018, I guess, or 17, by an economist. It's being led by an economist called Marcello Tedesco in the UK. Now, the interesting thing about this is that it builds on a lot of an already well-established tradition in economics about to trying to understand like the potential for cooperation, right, in economies. And we're going to be talking a little bit about the tragedy of the commons here in a moment. But what is the point and what is it that is emerging from this investigation? First of all, that while we may still deep inside believe that what moves the world is competition, right? Like what Tedesco and team, together with many other economists that are working in this space, are actually focusing on or pushing right now is that dichotomy between a competition or cooperation, what is better, I mean, it's really not helpful. What you have is a world where competition and cooperation coexist. But what the research that they have been doing have been trying to point to is that especially when the issues are complex, right? Like cooperation is fundamental and it becomes an issue of survival of the system, right? Rather than simply a nice to have thing. I want you to internalize this because again, when we talk about cooperation, when we talk about collaboration, and when we talk about multi-stakeholder and all, right? Like sometimes we either go from like over romanticizing the concept as something that it will be so nice to have, right? Or we actually completely say like that is worthless. That didn't work in my case or in my particular program. I'm not trying that again. And neither position is helpful. Now, as background, right, like this was the Science Magazine 2005 special on the keywords or the key questions for science over time. And one of those core questions for science for the 21st century was precisely about cooperation, the understanding of how cooperation happens at all levels, right? But we don't understand really how is it that it happens. I'm not talking only people. I'm talking cells. I'm talking ecosystems, right, in the environment. So why is it that while you may have different sets of animals or groups of animals, like or cells, like doing their own thing, but for specific things, and especially thinking in terms of survival, right, like it is key to collaborate with others, which is in the end a core central tenor of evolution over time. Okay? So if competition and cooperation continuously co-evolve, all right, then, well, firms compete, but they compete within ecosystems. Governments regulate, but they regulate within an ecosystem. Civil society mobilizes people within an ecosystem. They may actually be very successful at doing it or not so much, because when you start mobilizing people, right, you're going to mobilize first probably the ones that agree with you. But to get actually make things happen, you may need to mobilize others, those that disagree or partially disagree with you. That's a bit of what we're going to be looking at today. Here, I want to refer to a very important concept. It was in the readings too, right? Like, I don't know if you have heard in the past about the tragedy of the commons. It is a very important concept. When Garrett Hardin brought up this idea of the tragedy of the commons, which is typically or many times wrongly associated with Eleanor Ostrom. Eleanor Ostrom based her research, she was a Nobel Prize in economics, she based her research on the tragedy of the commons that was raised by Garrett Hardin. But there is a key difference between the approaches. When Garrett Hardin was discussing the challenge here of the tragedy of the commons, very much the way that he described it is almost as destiny. So human beings follow their own self-interest, and then when you have a shared resource, eventually you're going to reach depletion, right? As an inevitable result of self-interest. But then Ostrom, what she's trying to emphasize, not because she's just an optimist, but I mean, like just doing her work, doing her research, all right, in the end, is trying to understand when is it that cooperation can work. Nobody's saying that it's easy. Nobody's saying that it's automatic. So she actually shows that communities overcome the challenges of cooperation, right, by institutionalizing norms and building trust through repeated interactions. Cooperation can scale, but when it's supported by structural mechanisms. How do we get there? Okay, so when you see your resources, you're going to see these slides, right? Like, hopefully you like them too, but hopefully they are also useful, right? In connecting the concepts with the readings. And I'm gonna give you a larger set of readings for your amusement if you want to dig deeper into these concepts. I'm trying to avoid as much as I can readings from that are too old, okay? And try to bring actually readings that are more common. So in that sense, I'm emphasizing people like Tedesco, for example, that are using the concept of Ostrom, right, or the discussion of Ostrom, like in applied research and generating actually data around it, for example, rather than going back to the original Ostrom. But of course, you're more than welcome, like to look at her writings, right, and how she approaches the problem. But clear in mind, I'm synthesizing also years of work here, right? Like, I mean, like, but when you are looking for cooperation among different types of actors, or hell, even within the same kind of actor, think among like a group of private companies or a group of government agencies or a group of civil society organizations, a group of NGOs in a particular territory. Keep in mind these things as driving forces that could work in your favor towards cooperation. Let me challenge you there. Okay. These clues for cooperation to succeed, can they be used for evil? Anybody would like to share something? What about cooperation? How do you call cooperation when it is done for a reduced set of private interests? I'm waiting for you in the chat. You're not going to escape of every question that I'm posing over there. Feel free to participate. Anybody would like to say something? Share?
We do have a comment in the chat from
Yes.
Victor from a few
Victor.
minutes ago, and I've actually, Victor, yep, go ahead.
Right.
Thank you, Victor.
Thank you. My response is to the question that you asked on who is civil society.
Please.
And Matt, I think that the definition of the civil society, in my own view, would be defined by the roles that one plays in that whenever one plays the role of bridging the gap between the public and the government so that the needs of the public are addressed in the efforts of, improving the quality of lives of the people, addressing development issues, then that person at that point in time is having the interests of, or is having in the role of the civil society.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Victor. Now, just to provoke you, right? Like, you don't have to answer, or if you wanna, like, somebody else wants to answer, right? Like, what happens with the interests of the public, right, are so diverse that that connection with government or public sector either cannot occur, or only a few of those public views are actually put on the table.
Probably, I would think in the context of adapting, an adaptive method that is dynamic to be able to address these issues. So we come up with a method that addresses and is not, how would I put it, that is not rigid, a method that would bring all the issues together on the table. And then at the end of the day, because there is a government, then it serves as the role of the authority that makes the decision, a decision that is going to incorporate the best interests of the public.
That's great. Thank you very much. Like, what that brings us precisely is that the discussion of coordination, right? Like, because what most of the times ends up happening is that only some of the public views, which may or not be the ones of the majority, which may or not be the ones of the most marginalized groups, because sometimes the most marginalized group are not necessarily the majority, right? Like, may actually win. So, I deal with this, for example, very, very often. Right? You look at a particular territory, let's say a territory that depends structurally of mining and mining revenue. So I remember very vividly the first time that I went to a mining Indaba conference in South Africa. Right? Like, they have, which I love the concept. You have the fancy mining Indaba in one part of town, and at the same time you had the anti-Mindaba in a different part of town. So I went to the anti-Mindaba, and one thing that I appreciate very much is that many executives, not all of them, but many executives from mining companies will go from the fancy conference and they will actually show up at the anti-mining Indaba, which is good, right? Like, not everybody. And I remember vividly, like, a group of people protesting and intervening, right, during one particular panel. And then another group in the same room getting up and protesting against the protesters. And what you had in that moment is that the people that were protesting against human rights and conditions of work in the mines that were represented by this particular executive. And the other group, the counter protests, right, like, were actually complaining because there had just been agreed a particular deal, right, to secure a number of jobs. Now, it doesn't happen exactly like this, but I want to bet, right, that the first group was more representative of communities very close to the mine. And the second group probably, right, was more representative of communities closer or in urban areas benefited by the work of the mine in that area. So, who is the most representative civil society? I'm not asking you, right, necessarily to give me the answer there, right? But it's just a representation or just an example of the complexity at hand here. I have to say, for example, that in that case, it's not always the case, right? Like, those particular executives actually open up the conversation and they had a meeting, like, right there in the open on one side of the room, right? Like, talking about these issues. And there were a lot of promises on taking care of many of the issues that have been raised. I don't know, and I didn't follow up if that actually happened. right? But you have so many things in that very short story. You have the difference between groups in civil society, both of them believing that what they are fighting for is fair and is important for the public good, right? Right? And you have the story about the executives, right? Like on one hand, you may think, well, the guy was very brave, at least he went to just listen, right? Like and try to find a solution. Because obviously within the company also, the fact that these people protest to one of the heads has to do also because they maybe do not see a reaction or action from the people on the ground closer to the mine, which is a big issue with companies too. Companies operate by a particular logic, many times, not all the time, but many times based on quarterly reports of revenue or of earnings, or like how much you are actually making for the board members, right? For their key board of stakeholders. So what is it that you are, what is the incentive to actually do the right thing, if you want here, when sometimes your main goal or what your performance is going to be assessed against, right, is a number that has nothing to do with rights and equity. And I haven't even got into government there. I'm just trying to call attention on that particular tension, right? We talk about tension and the need for traction in this class a lot. Victor, before I move on, any reaction or counter or comment to what I just said? Do you feel that I answered your question, also your comment properly? Or also, if anybody else would like to bring something, please, after Victor, Leah, let me know.
Yes, it is well answered. Understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Leah, anything else? Or should I move on?
You can move on from my side.
We
Perfect.
have
Thank you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
we have a few more comments in the chat. I think Anurada may be unmuted, so feel free to speak. I'm just going to we have a smaller group here, so I'm just going to allow everyone to speak. So in the future, feel free to raise your hand, just unmute, talk. Let's make things a little bit more casual and accessible for everyone, so we don't have to keep going back and forth between the two of us. How's that sound?
On my side, fantastic.
Great. All right, please go ahead, Anurada.
Okay. Thank you,
Hey,
Leah.
hey, Anurada, thank you for coming.
Okay. Sounds good. It's a good representation. For me, this is more like an enlightening session because I've taught parliamentarians, I've taught pupils, I've practiced in numerous countries, but this is highly enlightening. My compliments to you to put this visual. Um, the complex theory of how a hybrid governance works and whether it is effective and what could be the nitty-gritties in different contexts. My question to you, or probably the reflection that I'm seeking from you, is I think most hybrid forms of governance have representation made almost correctly. But in terms of how effective it is always a question in most countries. I can share an example of what I worked upon in Bangladesh a few years for a
Please.
multilateral organization. We worked on a special economic zone through the World Bank, and we were creating the special economic zone preparatory assignments. And there were adequate measures, everything what is being said, like the civil society, the private sector, and the government very much on board. But apparently, it took us a very long while because World Bank, the good thing about the multilateralism is it comes with a lot of conditionalities and norms, even much stricter than what a civil society will look through a lens. So probably I thought capacity for participation was a constraint there because people might be knowledgeable, people might be affected, but capacity to participate was probably a hiccup there because it took us for a very long while because multilateral organization insist on a lot of participation being documented and ensuring nobody is affected. But this is a very interesting thing, which also reflects upon one of the readings that you gave, the isomorphic mimicry, in terms of the state, shared responsibilities, and also the blurred, the difference in goals between civil society and also, the combined hybrid governance forms. So could you enlighten on how could that participation or making civil society responsibility or incentive that you just spoke about, How could that be in a new public governance? How could that be different?
Oof. Oh, don't get me started. We're actually going to talk very much about this in a future session. I'm trying actually to convince a couple of speakers to talk about
Okay.
like this new, not actually not so new. Most of the things that even that are very innovative right now or that are being put on the table have been things that have been discussed or proposed or suggested for decades,
Yeah.
including things like, for example, uh, these open councils, right? Like for people to basically make decisions, make political decisions. The citizen assemblies, right? Like this whole idea of citizen assemblies. We actually, maybe I can announce it. We have got already acceptance. We have to define the date, like somebody that led actually the process of citizen assemblies in Ireland a few years ago. And I hope to have somebody from Eastway Foundation soon also because they are managing a global program on citizen assemblies that are very interesting and provocative, but also for political establishments, dangerous. Um, so there are different ways, including those that are very much ambitious, right? Like at the more macro or national level. There are many others that work with their own problems at the more local level. But here's the thing, all right? Think about a process that has been implemented in many countries to promote participation in practical ways at local level, and that has happened in many countries. An example is participatory budgeting. Okay, so part of the challenge is that we treat even a good idea as, let me put it in general, participatory development. And within participatory development, let me put it specifically on participatory budgeting, all right? And we implement it, but I don't know, government, civil society, right? Cooperation here and there. And then we forget about it. Once in a while or after a while, an evaluator comes, collects data based on indicators of success and may or not be reflected of a goal of empowering people, but more about expenditure, execution, on those kind of things, right? And that disconnect, right, between ultimate goals or intentions of a program, or why is it that we try this in the first place, and the way that we evaluate it, right? It tends to perpetuate the challenges of the process. What do I mean by this? Think about participatory budgeting. Very well researched, lots of good evidence, especially in the beginning from places like Brazil, right? An expansion and a scale up of the process in many countries. And then you have places, I'm going to speak of Peru because it's the case that I know the closest, right? Where it completely stalled and was captured over time. What do I mean by that? That, well, if you have people participating to decide on how to allocate 15% of public revenue in a district, all right, by law, which is the case in Peru, for example, then you have this meeting every year. But what you have is that in the beginning, you had 100 people showing up, many of them leaving aside everything that they have to do at home, right? They have to take care of the kids, they have to work, etc., etc. But they make an effort and they go. And turns out that out of those 100, right, every time that there is one of these assemblies, right, you have the same 2, 3, 4 people that dominate the conversation. So if I make all that effort to attend, and then I don't feel that I can speak, or I feel that the conversation is dominated by others, or even if I speak, right, like the final decision does not reflect, right, in a fair way, or that what I consider to be a fair way, what I'm bringing to the table, right, what I'm suggesting or proposing, probably the next meeting I'm not going to go. So participation starts going down, 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 down. But the people
Yeah.
that have that power or that voice or that representation, right, like are going to continue going. And typically is their interest, right, and their particular agenda, the one that is going to be prioritized. For the guys assessing this in Lima, right? Like it's a check. We held the 3 meetings. We came to the majority of people participating, actually participating, decided that this is the way forward. So that goes to the core of the issue of representation, because this is a complex problem. It's not a mechanical problem. It's not a finite game. It's an infinite game, as we're going to see now.
Yep.
So hopefully I help in answering that. Any other comment?
Absolutely.
Yes? Oh, thank you. Thank you so much,
Absolutely.
Arona.
That's okay. I just needed a conceptual reflection on this.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully it
Thank
helps.
you
I
very
would love
much.
also to talk about parliamentarians too. This is something that we don't talk enough about, but it's a
Yeah.
very interesting entry point precisely at the intersection of representation with an active voice, right, of civil society, of like the citizens in general.
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you. Anybody else before we move forward? Okay, before we actually look at tools to actually try to explore what is the kind of coalition or collaboration that we need to build for a particular problem, I need to introduce one additional concept that is linked to all this. All right. So you see, right, like typically when we think about game theory, okay, we tend to think about, I don't know if you have heard about it, right? Like the prisoner's dilemma or a variation of this. Like this idea that games are finite. They are play to win. Somebody has to win, somebody has to lose, right? They have clear rules, right? They have clear rules. And well, the whole point is that they are finite. They end. They have a beginning and at the end. What that beginning and the end is? 5 years, 1 year, 3 months, the timing of implementation of your project based on what your donor has funded you to do. Okay. Think about from the civil society, the NGO point of view, but also think about governments. Why are games finite? Because you are limited by the upcoming elections. Or maybe you have a period that most people refer to the honeymoon period right after you have been elected and you're in office where you may try to do a lot of stuff. But if you don't get to do the most radical stuff in the beginning, later it's going to be harder and harder to do. If you are a mayor, right, and or you are being asked to support a particular change in the ways that happen in your particular district, right? You need to assess if that is gonna affect you in the following election or not. Think about many of the challenges in development that we're talking about. These are challenges that are very hard to define in time. We take 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 3 generations to actually tackling them, like climate, which will imply that a lot of the decisions today need to be made knowing that they're going to be losers in the short term, but that most people win in the long term. But who's going to make that actually decision that we're going to prioritize the future rather than the present, where all the incentives are set up for the different actors in the short term? And don't even get me started with corporations. So this concept of an infinite game, okay, came out actually during the discussion of the Cold War, because very much like discussions on game theory around cooperation, deterrence, and all, particularly led by Rand Corporation, right, are thought that basically have in many ways prevented nuclear war. So what happens when a good idea works for a particular difficult problem? You just keep doing it and you just keep applying it to everything. But the funny story is that during that time where people were talking about game theory and how to apply it to nuclear deterrence, right, and later to many other problems, there was one particular guy, right, like that in those conversations, he always kept bringing up like this idea that, okay, but what if the objective of the game is to keep playing the game? What if the game where we are, the challenge where we are, the board where we are, right, is actually an infinite game? Just a different way to refer to these complex ideas. So if we think of climate reform, the rethinking of democracy, a challenge of sustainable public health, right? Like they may actually resemble more infinite games where the rules need to be adapting because the different players keep trying also to just play against the rules. Because while the incentives or the outlook is of long term, while the outlook is of no long term in that infinite game, the different players keep moving based on their short term incentives. So if you have actors trapped against their will or willingly, okay, in a system of finite incentives, what kind of coalition architecture is necessary to make certain compromises that allow you to think in infinite terms? I'm going to leave you with one question because we're going to talk about this in 4 weeks, okay? Think about this concept of infinite game when you think about corruption. If you are a public official, a private sector or person, or you are a civil society representative that is committed to zero corruption, to fight corruption at all costs. You're focused on transparency and in accountability, right? In all your actions in the work that you're doing. What are you assessed against? You have to respond to a board of directors. You have to respond to a donor that gave you money for a certain amount of time against certain metrics. You have to respond to all these different finite games challenge based on the system of incentives that you have. But the people organize around corruption. If this is a finite game and if they lose, they go to jail. They lose everything. They play a different game than you. Just think about it. We'll go back to this, but hopefully it makes kind of sense. Again, a lot of the things that we're discussing, you can use them in positive terms to actually rethink or reorganize the way that you approach things. Hopefully, it is helpful in that way. But keep in mind that none of these that I'm telling you, right, is foreign to somebody that uses a lot of these discussions, but precisely for private interests or for a particular set of interests. If I have time in a bit, I'm going to tell you a short story to wrap up, okay, that is really linked to this. So again, this is what you read for this class about this institutional identity, these hats between different players. And I'm going to give you these slides and all. But ask yourself, you don't have to put it on the board, etc., but think about it, okay? If you change jobs tomorrow from an NGO, an environmental NGO, to a ministry, say the Ministry of Environment, it's a great opportunity, right, to affect change. But what do you think that will be your limitations? What are the things that you're going to be able to say and the things that are not? Status, that's the word I was looking for. Forgot completely. When we talk about these different dynamics, we talk about the participatory budgeting meetings, right? We talk about the mining visions, right, for a particular territory, right? Like you go back and back to this idea that there are some actors that speak loudly and actually dominate the conversation, right? And you have other actors that do not participate, either because they self-censor, right? They defer to the authority, right? Or avoid dissent. Quick story. 2 years ago, I had the opportunity, because it was a study visit, to go to a community right next to a mining area in Zambia, in northern Zambia. And we had a wonderful reception, right? Like, this was organized by local government and international cooperation. And we are a bunch of us. And we visit a community. And the whole community comes and meets with us, etc. I mean, like, their welcome, their hospitality was amazing. I'm very thankful. The whole conversation, right, was dominated by the two community leaders. And when we were asking questions to everybody, it was always the same two people that will answer, nobody else. Suddenly, until the end, like, this young guy, 18, 19 years old, raises his hand. And he starts to tell us, like, I need to tell you something, you are visiting, etc., etc., and I disagree with what it has been said about, like, the benefits that we see for youth in this particular community. He was so brave. And you could see that many of the people in the community, no, I'm not even going to say the community leaders, right? Like, they were looking at the guy like, what are you doing? Because on one hand, right, like, it's an issue of, like, what are the rules of that particular community? Being the elders, right, are supposed to actually address the foreigners that are visiting, right? Or there may certain issues that we may not want to discuss here, right? Like, why do we call too much attention into us? And they may be legitimate. I'm not questioning that they are not legitimate, right? But what are the mechanisms to actually try to understand what may be the perspective of those groups within a community, within a company, or within a government, right? Of those that may think different, that may actually bring some nuance to the conversation that actually helps moving forward, right? But that they may not want to talk. And that is a challenge. So throughout the rest of the class, you're going to see me mentioning two of my intellectual heroes these days, which are Mariana Mazzucato, right, and Yuen Ang. Mariana is in, I guess it's the University of Central London, and Yuen Ang is very close to us, actually, in Hopkins, right? And they actually bring a lot of enlightenment in terms of, like, how does it share, particularly from the state point of view, when you actually have shared missions, and how do you organize your resources against certain missions. And it's very much about changing the logic of, one, what is the ultimate goal that we have here, right? And then how do we organize our resources around those goals? And she actively works, this is not just an academic thing, she actually actively works with different governments in exploring how is it that you can reorganize, this is governance, right? Like, in such a way that allows you to better pursue those shared missions. And Yuen Ang has been bringing about a lot of the discussion about the future of development, right? And this discussion of how this polycrisis can become a polytunity, right? And in that particular context, the importance of inclusion of perspectives. Because in the end, when we are not including different perspectives, right, that go beyond representation to the point of Anurada, right? Like, how is it that we move just for passive representation to have these opportunities, these mechanisms to actually understand when there is stress in the system, ideally before conflict implodes. And Yuen Ang actually bring about a lot of the experience of China in this, particularly experimentation within the state at the local level, and how that was set up. Okay? This is the idea of how do we move, right? Like, from for lack of a better term, if we want, because this is so, we tend to see the word many times in terms of markets, okay? And this has to do with legacy too. So I'm just paraphrasing what is right now, for example, in Matsukato's framework, right? From this focus that, oh, there is a failure, a market failure, a governance failure, or a civil society failure. Let's fix it. Let's patch so our theory of how things should work actually works. Look at what I'm saying. The focus of our action in that case becomes shaping reality so our theory of what should happen actually works. When you look into a mindset of market shaper, you are building your strategy and your actions around the mission that you are pursuing. I'm not saying that this approach is perfect. I'm not saying that everything else in the past doesn't work and this works, okay? But notice the change in mindset. It is important. And of course, we'll leave more resources for you, okay? As usual, we're gonna run out of time, right? Because yeah, that's the rule. But I feel that at least we're having also more interaction with you guys, and that is for me the most important thing. That's where we gain. We all gain here, rather than just trying to complete the slide deck. The slide deck is gonna be there for you, and you can of course ask questions about it during the week or next week when we convene again. Okay. So I want to provoke you with this idea that you are actually probably not lacking ideas on what to do and how to do it, but you are lacking a cooperation map. We all focus and obsess about what is the solution that I'm going to bring to the problem, or my NGO, or my government office, my administration, my region, right? But we are not actively looking who do we need to cooperate with. And by that, I also mean potentially people that we don't like. In 2 weeks, I can already announce it. On the 18th, we're going to have Adam Kahane with us, the author of this book, Collaborating with the Enemy. And the reading is going to be from this book, actually. So he's actually going to join us in 2 weeks together. I can already announce it too, with the coordinator for the Coalitions for Reform initiative at the World Bank. So we're going to have both Adam and, oh my God, yeah, I forgot the name. Mathieu Gutier. They are going to join us in 2 weeks, right? You're going to have readings about what they are doing, both at the World Bank and at Rios Partners. And we're going to ask you to submit questions in advance for them. So hopefully it will be enjoyable and you're going to listen much less of me, which is the best part. Okay? Now, I want you that if you did the exercise on the board, mapping the actors, or if you didn't, do it now, okay? This is basically the homework for next week, and we'll send you material with this, for this. Remember, in the end, if you do the homework or not is your decision. You make the choice. You may not have time. I completely understand. And if there are ways in which we can help you so you have better ways to actually like act and work on some of these exercises, please let us know. We don't have all the answers. All right. But I challenge you to go back to what you were thinking for that particular problem, right? Or we will propose you two problems too that you can use as for exploring. And look at this. If you are thinking that to make things happen, right, you need to keep in mind a series of factors, I ask you, right, like that to see if in that mapping that you have done now for this class or in the past for your work, right, take a look, especially if no REN losers have been explicitly identified. If you haven't actually mapped Who lost? All years and years of efforts to take away oil subsidies in Nigeria, for example. None of the actions kept in mind what to do about NNPC, the National Organization for Petroleum. Because there were a lot of losers that were going to lose with that particular with actions over there. Okay, this is something that we have had the opportunity of following closer under the problem. The informal veto power remains unmapped. That's a problem. Who can actually stop your reform? Not only that, who loses, but also who can veto it. And we're talking about parliaments. The part of the challenge in Peru, for example, it has been for the last 10 years, parliament precisely. Right? And actually the president's office has lost a lot of power. Take a look and be aware if implementation risk is concentrated in a single actor. That's a problem. If it is your NGO or your group of NGOs, right, the ones that run with implementation risk, that's not good. You may actually do enough to satisfy your donor and maybe get another round of funding, okay? But probably you're not going to solve the problem. And 4, narratives. The project narrative, if it reads entirely technocratic, that is a problem too. So we're going to leave you with a set of tools that I would like you to explore on your own, right? Like, check them out. There is a lot of information in this slide deck about each one of the tools. We're going to propose you tomorrow a similar board on Miro and a set of questions that are going to help you explore these tools. So what you need to do the exercise is come back to these slides, these last slides, which are sort of like a manual for tools to explore what is the kind of coalition that you need to make things happen. Okay? And this is all part of our discussion. This is from class 2, right? About strategy. What we're doing here is not to try to build a theory of change. We're trying to build a strategy that has a chance. And the core characteristic of strategies that work in development is that they are prepared for durability. How do we move from the donor cycle of funding? How do we move beyond elections? How do we move beyond the opposition of groups that are going to lose power or that are going to lose money through the reform or what you're trying to do? Who do we need as an ally? Comment there. Just an example. When there was a big push from companies, particularly in the extractive sector around nickel in the Philippines, you have a very weak legal framework over there for mining, like the last mining, maybe they changed it in the last year, I don't know, in case somebody from the Philippines is aware, right? Like the last mining law is from 1990 or 80 or 85, right? Like, and then you have nickel showing up. So obviously people want to get to the nickel. But guess what? Philippines is a country who historically 1% of their GDP comes from mining. 1%. In no legal framework. And the push to actually get the land and extract the nickel, because obviously there's a lot of money involved, right, for electric batteries. Who was an unexpected ally to actually hold on and let's rethink this? Yeah, of course, there were leaders in parliament, right, like that spoke up. Of course, there were leaders in public opinion that spoke up. But companies that depend on, for example, water sources, natural water sources, to actually do their products were unexpected allies for this. Or at least, let's wait. We have to analyze this. Maybe in a different discussion, in a different time, those same companies may actually have countering positions with local communities. But in this particular point, they were instrumental. How do we build coalitions that have a chance of working? It is an art, but these tools could help. Okay. So when you look at these 5 tools, we're out of time, right? Like, think in terms of architecting. This is why we actually titled architecting. We're going to look at coalition mapping as foundation, identity silence, veto players, risk assertion, legitimacy narrative. Each one of these tools is based around one question. Okay? So, first of all, we need to understand what is the minimum viable coalition. And that map of actors that you made, that people that we need for this to happen, all right? Now we can map them as beneficiaries, neutral actors, friend losers, and veto players. They are all important in this framework. You can do this by answering that question. Who are the critical actors that must say yes and who simply must not say no? We have these categories, okay? The coalition framework. Beneficiaries, rent losers, veto players, incentive shifts, and neutral actors. Okay? It's all here. And it gives you the instructions. Who must say yes, who must not say no. And this helps you start exploring what is that viable, minimum viable coalition. Okay? It's not the perfect coalition, but it's a starting point to do this analysis. Then we move into understanding all these different hats that the different actors are wearing. Okay? So what we start thinking is that, okay, if the forum where we're going to have these discussions is public or private, how will this actor behave? Will be close and more focused on survival, right? Or maybe we'll move forward just because of compliance? Or do you think that some of these actors may actually be convinced into being more problem focused, right, and help you solve it? This discussion of like how the way that you act against on the same problem varies in a public forum, how you speak to the media, that in private is key. Another example, I'm not going to save the country, okay? But you have the representative in this particular country in Asia of a number of anti-mining NGOs. And you have the representative of mining companies in a particular fora. Okay? In public, they disagree a lot because they wear their hats. They represent their own particular interests because they believe in them. Okay? But they wear those hats. Turns out they're friends from school. So they know each other very well. And they are much more reasonable in private than what they are in a public forum. We're leaving on promise. You just give me 3 minutes. I'm just going over this, okay? Structural choke points. I mean, it sounds fancy, okay? But it's easier than that. It's simply in this graph, right? Like how you have the initiative at the center, what you want to accomplish, what you want to do, okay? Because you believe in it, because you feel that this is going to have an impact in the problem, in the challenge that you are tackling, all right? And how those same actors that you actually mapped before, right? Like can have direct or indirect influence into it. Just that. These spheres of influence are very similar, by the way, to what we discussed last week when we saw the ecological model of Lori Hayes. Okay? Phase 4, distribute the weight. I had a great story for you here, but I'm not going to tell it anymore because we don't have time. But identify who of those actors bears political risk, financial risk, implementation burden, reputational exposure. Because if you need them, but they fear that they are going to lose in one of these, they're not going to help you or they're going to drag their feet. Reforms fail when risk concentration is asymmetric. And finally, the facade. Okay? The facade is your narrative. Why we're doing this? People rally not only behind people, other people, or rally behind an idea. They rally behind a story. So is your story elite driven, foreign, marked by international cooperation, technocratic, or is it community owned, national, understood as fair? Strategy aims for durability, and durability depends on legitimacy. Are we building that legitimacy for the future? Thank you. I guess sadly, we don't have much more time, and I'm very sorry that we didn't get to do more. So we'll send you more instructions about this exercise. Hopefully you join us in developing that. I'll send the instructions and potentially a video about it. Come back. This works sort of like these final slides work as a manual. So you can go through the different tools and the questions that are behind, right? Like each one of these tools is set up around certain questions. You will see there's like a box with questions. That's what you have to answer. Those responding in the jot form will send you the questions of the jot form. Those responding on the Miro board, you will have the Miro board with these questions. I don't want you to go out of the way. If you already did this exercise, use the same actors. Add some that now become more obvious after this class. Or start the exercise from the onset. Again, everything that you share, that you contribute, will be used. We'll keep bringing it during the classes, right? Or like we will include it, if you allow us to, into that discussion document that we're going to have at the end. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today again. I'm sorry that we're late. We tried to keep it up, but hopefully you find it useful. Feel free to send us questions. Invite a friend to the next session. We're going to be talking about systems. And with that, we complete all the theory. Then we're going to talk practice. We're going to have guest speakers, and we're going to invite those of you that are working on the same issues as the guest speakers to join us in a conversation with them. If you want to take that opportunity, take it. Okay? This class is for that. So hopefully you find it useful. We're going to look at every single one of your questions and comments, right? So if I didn't get to answer anything that you asked or said, you're going to hear from us by next class. All right? I'm going to make a comment to that. Join us again next week, hopefully. Thank you for those that came again. Sorry for those that joined the streaming and got out because there were some technical issues. Thank you. Much appreciated. See you soon, guys.
Thanks all. And if you have any final questions, we'll be here for a few more minutes.
Yes, we're around, by the way. Thank you. Oh, Macarena, Stanley, Sandy, TY, Lauren Hopkins. Lauren, I got some comments from you, I guess, from the first session. I'll send you more. Adaudo, Hanan. Thank you, everybody, for joining.